How do you read a book that everyone says changed their life, but almost nobody actually finishes? You've seen Human Action on the shelf or in your Kindle library where it's been sitting for 6 months. Maybe you've started it twice. Made it to page 47 the first time, page 63 the second. Both times you hit a wall of dense prose about epistemological problems and thought, I'm not smart enough for this. Here's what nobody tells you. Ludwig von Mises wrote Human Action in 1949 for ordinary educated people, not economics PhDs. The problem isn't your intelligence. The problem is you're trying to read a systematic treatise, like it's a Malcolm Gladwell book. It's not. It's 900 pages of rigorous logical argument where every chapter builds on what came before, where Mises repeats core principles in different contexts until they're unshakable, where he demands you think alongside him, not just absorb information. And right now, in 2024, while your grocery bill keeps climbing and politicians promise solutions that sound increasingly insane, you need what's in this book more than ever. Because Mises explains exactly why inflation isn't corporate greed, why government fixes create the problems they claim to solve, why central planning fails every single time. Not as opinion, as logical necessity. But you're stuck on page 63. I get it. I've been there. I've watched smart people, engineers, lawyers, entrepreneurs give up on Human Action because they approached it wrong. And I've watched ordinary folks with high school diplomas master it because someone showed them how. The difference wasn't IQ. It was method. Mises himself said the body of economic knowledge is an essential element in the structure of human civilization. He wrote this book to be understood. He avoided academic jargon. He used everyday examples, restaurant menus, Roman inflation, medieval price controls. He was a stern but caring professor who respected readers enough to demand rigorous thinking. But he also assumed you'd read systematically, patiently, with a method designed for treatises, not beach reads. You're not failing at reading Human Action. You're succeeding at recognizing it deserves better than skimming. That instinct that this book matters too much to fake your way through. That's exactly right. In the next few minutes, I'm going to give you the complete study method that works, not generic reading tips. A specific, tested approach for mastering Mises' systematic treatise. You'll learn why the book is structured the way it is, how to navigate its density, where to start, hint, not necessarily page 1, what to do when you hit confusion, and how to make the logic stick. So you're not just reading. You're transforming how you understand economics, politics, and human action itself. By the end, you'll have a roadmap, not just to finish the book, but to genuinely own its insights. If you're serious about understanding the economic chaos around you at the deepest level, subscribe to this channel. We explore the thinkers who explain why the world works the way it does, and how to think clearly when everyone else is panicking. Before we get to technique, you need to understand what kind of book you're dealing with. Because if you approach Human Action like a typical nonfiction book, you'll fail. Not because you're not smart enough, because you're using the wrong tool for the job. Here's what I mean. When you read most books, business books, history, even philosophy, you're extracting insights. You read a chapter, get the main point, maybe highlight a good quote, move on. The chapters are semi-independent. You could read them out of order and still get value. The author assumes you're busy, skimming, jumping around. Mises wrote the opposite of that. Human Action is what's called a systematic treatise. That means every single chapter is a logical brick in a massive architectural structure. Remove one brick, the whole thing doesn't make sense. Skip ahead, you're lost because you're missing the foundation. Mises isn't giving you disconnected insights to collect. He's building an airtight logical system where each conclusion follows necessarily from what came before. Think about Euclidean geometry. You can't skip to the Pythagorean theorem without understanding axioms, postulates, and prior proofs. The theorem only makes sense because of everything that came before. That's Human Action. Mises starts with basic axioms about human nature. People act purposefully. They prefer more to less, they face scarcity. Then builds a complete science of economics through pure logical deduction. You know what's wild? He wrote this in exile. Mises fled the Nazis in 1940, lost everything: his position, his library, his country. He arrived in America at 59 years old, professionally destroyed, and spent the next 9 years writing this monument, not for academics who rejected him, for regular people who needed to understand how civilization works and why socialism destroys it. He respected you enough to demand you think rigorously. That's why the prose is dense. Not because Mises was showing off or being obscure, because he refused to sacrifice precision for easy reading. When he defines action or value or capital, he's establishing exact concepts that will bear enormous logical weight later. Sloppy definitions would make the whole system collapse. Here's the thing though, and this is crucial. Mises also made it as accessible as humanly possible given the rigor required. He avoided academic jargon. When he needed a technical term, he explained it immediately with concrete examples. Restaurant menus illustrate subjective value. Roman currency debasement shows inflation. Medieval price controls demonstrate why government intervention fails. But you're still on page 63. Why? Because you're reading linearly at the wrong pace, not checking your understanding, not wrestling with the logic. You're passively absorbing when Mises demands active thinking. When you hit a confusing paragraph, you keep going hoping it'll make sense later. It won't. Mises builds cumulatively. Confusion on page 63 means you missed something on page 45. Notice how this is completely opposite of how we read online. Skimming, jumping, getting the gist. That works for articles. It's suicide for systematic treatises. So here's what we need to do. Develop a method that matches what Mises actually wrote. A method that respects the book's systematic nature, that builds understanding brick by brick, that catches confusion early before it compounds, that makes you wrestle with logic until it clicks. That's what the rest of this guide is. And I promise you this, if you follow this method, human action will stop being intimidating and start being exhilarating. Because there's a special pleasure in watching a perfect logical system unfold. It's like watching a master craftsman build a cathedral. Every stone precisely placed, the whole structure rising toward an incredible conclusion. Mises built that cathedral. Now, let's learn how to walk through it properly. Okay, here's where most people go wrong from the very beginning. They open human action to page 1 and start reading. Cold, no preparation, no context, just diving into acting man with zero framework for what's coming. That's like showing up to advanced calculus without taking algebra. Technically, you could try. You'll just be lost the entire time. Let me tell you what works instead. Before you read a single page of human action, you need to do 3 things. These aren't optional. They're foundation. Skip them and you're building on sand. First, read Mises' short essay, Economic Calculation in the Socialist Commonwealth. This 1920 essay is where Mises first proved that socialist central planning is logically impossible. Not inefficient, not suboptimal, but literally impossible because without private property and means of production, there are no market prices. And without market prices, rational economic calculation is impossible. Central planners are flying blind. Why start here? Because this 50-page essay contains a core insight that animates all of human action. It's Mises' intellectual atomic bomb, and it's written clearly, directly, for a general audience. You can read it in an afternoon, and suddenly you understand what Mises is trying to do in the bigger book. Show how market prices coordinate all economic activity, and why interfering with that coordination creates chaos. When you later hit the dense chapters on economic calculation in human action, you're not encountering the idea for the first time. You're seeing Mises develop with full rigor what you already grasp intuitively. That changes everything. Second, watch or read at least one good introduction to Austrian economics. You need the basic vocabulary and the key players. What's praxeology? Who was Karl Menger? What's the difference between Austrian and mainstream economics? Why did Mises clash with Keynesians? I'm not saying become an expert. I'm saying get oriented. Know that Austrians use logical deduction, not statistical modeling. Know that they start from the axiom of purposeful human action. Know that they rejected mathematical formalism as inappropriate for understanding human choice. Why does this matter? Because human action is Mises presenting the complete, systematic development of Austrian economics. If you don't know you're reading Austrian economics, if you think this is just economics, you'll be confused why he rejects approaches you've heard are standard. You'll think he's being contrarian instead of understanding he's building from completely different foundations. 10 hours of good introductory content will save you 50 hours of confusion in the book. Third, understand the historical context Mises wrote from. By 1949, Mises had lived through the collapse of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, the hyperinflation of the 1920s, the rise of Nazism and communism, the Great Depression and World War II. He'd watched bad economic ideas destroy civilizations. He'd fled for his life. He'd seen colleagues murdered. Human action wasn't an academic exercise. It was a desperate attempt to preserve the knowledge that makes civilization possible, written by a man who'd watched civilization nearly die. When Mises writes urgently about the dangers of interventionism, he's not being dramatic. He's remembering Weimar Germany, where bad monetary policy created the conditions for Hitler. When he insists on the importance of sound economic thinking, he's thinking of the intellectuals who praised Stalin while millions starved. This context doesn't make the logic different. Logic is logic, but it makes you read differently, with appropriate seriousness, with recognition that these aren't just ideas. They're the difference between prosperity and destruction. Here's what's beautiful. You could do all three of these in a week. One afternoon for the socialist calculation essay, a few evenings for Austrian economics intro content, an hour reading about Mises' life and times. 1 week of preparation that transforms a 900-page slog into an engaging intellectual journey. I know you want to just start reading. I get it, but trust me on this. Every hour of preparation saves you 10 hours of confused reading and rereading. Do the foundation work. Your future self, 300 pages in, and actually understanding what Mises is saying, well, thank you. All right, now you've done the prep work. You understand what a systematic treatise is. You've got the Austrian economics foundation. You know the historical context. You're ready to actually read human action. Here's the method that works. And by works, I mean, lets you understand and retain what Mises is actually saying, not just move your eyes across pages. Step 1. Read the chapter title and all section headings first. Seriously, before you read a single paragraph, scan the entire chapter structure. Human action is beautifully organized. Mises tells you exactly where he's going. The headings are a roadmap. For example, Chapter 4, a first analysis of the category of action, has sections like means and ends, the scale of value, the scale of needs. Just reading those headings tells you. This chapter is breaking down the components of purposeful action. He's going to define key terms and show how they relate. When you know the destination, the journey makes sense. When you're wandering blind, every paragraph feels random. Step 2, read one section at a time, and I mean slowly. This is where people mess up. They try to read human action at normal reading speed, 200 to 300 words per minute, the speed you'd read a novel or newspaper. Wrong speed, totally wrong. For Mises, you want maybe 50 to 100 words per minute. You're not consuming information. You're following logical arguments that require you to think alongside him. When he makes a deduction, stop, think it through. Do you see why B follows from A? Can you imagine a counterexample? Does the logic hold? Here's what Mises himself would do. He'd use Socratic questions to test understanding. So do that. After each major paragraph, ask yourself, what would happen if the opposite were true? If Mises says interventionism creates problems requiring more interventionism, imagine a world where intervention fixed problems cleanly. Can you? No. Why not? work through the logic. Let me give you a concrete example. In part 1, Mises argues that human action is necessarily purposeful. People act to move from a less satisfactory state to a more satisfactory state. Simple, right? Stop. Think. What if someone acts randomly or pointlessly? Mises would say, even random action is chosen because the person prefers acting randomly to not acting randomly in that moment. There's still purpose, satisfying the desire for randomness. The logic is airtight, but you only see that if you slow down and wrestle with it. Step 3. Take notes in your own words, not Mises's words, yours. After each section, close the book and write 2 to 3 sentences summarizing what you just read. If you can't, you didn't understand it. Go back. This forces active processing. You can't fake understanding in your own words. And the act of translation, from Mises's formal prose to your casual summary, cements the concepts. Your notes might look like, Mises says all action involves choosing between alternatives. You always give up something, opportunity cost. To get something you want more. This is why economics is about scarcity and choice, not just money. That's it. Simple. But now you own that idea. Step 4. When you hit confusion, stop immediately. Do not keep reading hoping it'll make sense later. It won't. Mises builds cumulatively. Confusion means you missed something earlier. A definition, a logical step, a key distinction. Go back. Reread the previous section. Check your notes. Find where the logic chain broke. This feels slower. It is slower. But here's the thing. Reading 50 pages with genuine understanding is infinitely more valuable than skimming 300 pages in confusion. You're not racing. You're building a mental structure that will serve you for life. If this approach to serious reading excites you, if you want to genuinely master the thinkers who explain our world, hit the like button and drop a comment telling me which part of human action you're most interested in. Let's build a community of people who read, understand, not just to finish. Step 5. End each reading session by reviewing. Before you close the book, flip back to the chapter you just read. Scan your notes. Can you reconstruct the argument from memory? What was Mises's main point? What logical steps got him there? This 5-minute review solidifies everything. Without it, you'll forget half of what you read by tomorrow. Here's the truth. Using this method, you might only get through 10 to 15 pages per reading session. That's fine. That's perfect, actually, because those 10 pages are now permanently part of your understanding. You didn't just read them. You absorbed them, tested them, translated them, reviewed them. At that rate, human action takes 60 to 90 reading sessions. If you read 3 times a week, that's 6 months. 6 months to master one of the most important books ever written about how human civilization works. That's not slow. That's building a cathedral of understanding, brick by brick. Now here's where I'm going to tell you something controversial that would probably make Mises frown. You don't have to read human action cover to cover in order. Wait, didn't I just say it's a systematic treatise where everything builds on what came before? Yes, and that's still true. But there's a smarter way to navigate 900 pages than pure linear reading, especially for beginners. Here's the strategy that actually works. Start with part 3, economic calculation. I know. That's like starting a novel at chapter 7. But hear me out. Part 3 is where Mises delivers the knockout punch. The detailed explanation of why socialist central planning is impossible and how market prices coordinate economic activity. This is the beating heart of the book. This is what changes how you see everything from inflation to supply chain chaos to government intervention. And here's the key. Mises wrote part 3 to be maximally clear because this was his most important contribution. He knew he was making an argument that contradicted the entire intellectual establishment. So he made it bulletproof and accessible. If you start here, you get the central insight that makes the rest of the book make sense. You understand why Mises cares so much about sound economic theory. You see what's at stake. Then, When you go back to read parts 1 and 2, the epistemological and methodological foundations, you're not reading abstract philosophy, wondering why it matters. You're reading the rigorous foundation for insights you already find compelling. The motivation is there. Next, read part 4, the harmony and conflict of interests. This is where Mises demolishes the Marxist idea that capitalism creates class conflict and shows how free markets actually create harmony of interests through division of labor and voluntary exchange. It's practical. It addresses objections you've definitely heard, and it's deeply satisfying intellectually. Then read part 5, social cooperation without a market. This covers socialism and interventionism in detail, showing systematically why every form of government economic control fails. Given that you're living through massive government intervention right now, inflation, industrial policy, trade wars, this part is immediately applicable to understanding your daily economic reality. At this point, you've read the core economic arguments. You understand the Austrian position on the big questions. How do markets work? Why does socialism fail? What's wrong with interventionism? Now go back and read parts 1 and 2, human action, and action within the framework of society. These lay the epistemological and methodological foundations, what praxeology is, how economic laws are derived, how Austrian economics differs from positivist approaches. This is more abstract and philosophical, but now you care, because you've seen where the method leads. You've experienced how powerful the insights are. So when Mises explains why economics must use logical deduction rather than statistical modeling, you're nodding along thinking, yes, this is why his analysis of socialism is so much more rigorous than empirical studies. Finally, read parts 6 and 7, the hampered market economy and the place of economics in society. These apply the principles to specific policy questions, wages, monopoly, taxation, etc., and discuss economics' role in human knowledge. These are incredibly valuable, but make most sense after you've absorbed the core theoretical structure. What about skipping sections entirely? Here's my honest take. There are a few highly technical sections you can skip on first reading. The detailed discussions of monetary calculation accounting, Part 3, sections 12 to 13, get very specialized. The extensive historical examples in some chapters, while fascinating, aren't necessary for understanding the logic. But here's the rule. Only skip what's clearly tangential. Never skip because it's hard. Hard means important. Hard means you're being asked to think rigorously. That's the whole point. And honestly, even the skippable sections are worth reading eventually. Mises didn't include anything frivolous. But if you're a beginner, try to get the core insights first. Strategic navigation beats exhausted abandonment on page 63. One more thing, get a physical copy. I know everyone loves Kindle, but human action demands flipping back and forth, checking definitions from earlier chapters, scanning section headings to orient yourself. Physical is better for systematic treatises. You want the scholar's edition from the Mises Institute if possible. It has the best layout and indexing. Here's the beautiful part of this navigation strategy. Within 3 months of focused reading, you'll have covered the essential core of human action. Not everything, but the parts that transform how you understand economics and politics. You'll be able to explain the economic calculation problem, critique interventionism, defend free markets, all with rigorous logical backing. Then you can go back and fill in what you skipped. Or not, because honestly, absorbing 70% of human action thoroughly puts you ahead of 99% of people who claim to have read it. Reading human action is one thing. Actually internalizing it so it changes how you think, so you can apply Austrian insights to real-world situations, that's another thing entirely. The difference comes down to active engagement. You can't just read Mises and expect his logic to magically embed in your brain. You have to work with it, test it, argue with it, apply it. Here are the techniques that make human action stick. Technique 1, the explain it to a child test. After you finish a major section, imagine you have to explain it to a smart 12-year-old. How would you do it? This forces you to strip away the formal language and get to the core logic. If you can't explain it simply, you don't actually understand it. Mises himself used everyday examples, restaurant menus, choosing between coffee and tea, precisely because economic logic should be accessible. Try this. After reading about subjective value theory, explain to an imaginary kid why the same bottle of water is worth more in the desert than a home. If you can walk through the logic clearly, different circumstances mean different valuations. Value is in the mind, not in the object itself. You've got it. Do this out loud. I'm serious. Talk through the explanation. It's weird, but it works. Speaking forces clarity in a way thinking alone doesn't. Technique 2, the real-world application journal. Keep a separate notebook where you record current events through a Misesian lens. Every week, find 3 news stories about inflation, labor policy, trade, regulation, whatever, and analyze them using concepts from human action. For example, you read about politicians proposing rent control. In your journal, Mises would say this is price control that creates shortages. When you cap rent below market price, quantity demanded exceeds quantity supplied. Result: fewer rentals available, deteriorating housing quality, black markets. Intervention creates the housing crisis it claims to solve. Interventionist spiral. This does 2 things. First, it proves you can actually apply the theory. If you can't analyze a rent control story, you don't really understand the concept. Second, it makes Mises feel urgent and relevant instead of abstract and historical. You're seeing Austrian principles play out in real time. After 6 months of this, you'll have a whole journal of applied Austrian analysis. That's worth more than any economics degree. Technique 3, the steelman objection exercise. Mises is convincing, dangerously convincing. After reading him, it's easy to think he's demolished every possible objection to free markets. But intellectual honesty requires you to consider the strongest counter-arguments. So here's what you do. After reading Mises make a case, say, against minimum wage laws, sit down and write the absolute best argument for minimum wage you can imagine, not a strawman. The smartest, most compelling version. Then see if Mises's logic still holds against that strong objection. Usually it does. But the exercise keeps you honest. It prevents you from becoming a dogmatic Austrian who just repeats talking points. It makes you genuinely understand why the logic works, not just that Mises says it works. And occasionally, very occasionally, you might find a genuine tension or question Mises doesn't fully address. That's okay. That's you thinking for yourself, which is exactly what Mises wanted. He didn't want disciples. He wanted clear thinkers. Technique 4, the teaching back method. Find one person, a friend, family member, online study buddy, and commit to teaching them what you're learning from human action. Every week or 2, you give them a 10-minute lesson on a concept you just mastered. The catalactic competition theory, time preference, the regression theorem of money. Whatever you just read, teaching forces mastery. You can't fake your way through teaching. You have to actually understand the logical chain well enough to anticipate questions and explain clearly. Plus, it's more fun than reading alone. You're building shared understanding. And honestly, having someone to discuss Mises with keeps you motivated through the hard parts. Technique 5, the patience practice. This one's simple but crucial. When you hit a paragraph that makes 0 sense, don't get frustrated. Expect it. Mises is rigorous. Some ideas require multiple readings. Here's what you do. Read the confusing paragraph 3 times slowly. Still confused? Read the preceding paragraph again. You probably miss a key term or logical step. Still confused? Put a bookmark there and move on. Come back tomorrow with fresh eyes. I'm telling you this because the biggest reason people quit human action isn't that it's too hard. It's that they get frustrated when understanding doesn't come immediately. They think, I must be stupid. You're not stupid. You're reading a systematic treatise that assumes you'll wrestle with difficult concepts. That's normal. That's the process. Mises spent 9 years writing this book. You can spend 9 minutes on a hard paragraph. The patience to sit with difficulty is itself a skill worth developing. In a world of instant gratification and shallow skimming, the ability to struggle productively with complex ideas is a superpower. And here's the payoff. When that confusing paragraph finally clicks, when you suddenly see why economic calculation requires private property or how time preference explains interest rates, the dopamine hit is incredible. You didn't just read something. You conquered it. That feeling is what keeps you going through 900 pages. So here we are. You started this video stuck on page 63 of Human Action, wondering if you'd ever actually finish this massive book, doubting whether you were smart enough to understand Ludwig von Mises. Now you know the truth. The problem was never your intelligence. It was your method. Human Action isn't a book you read the way you read everything else. It's not a collection of insights to extract and move on. It's a systematic, logical structure that demands systematic reading. Slow, active, cumulative, rigorous. Reading where you think alongside Mises. Test his logic. Translate concepts into your own words. Apply principles to your reality. The 5-step method we covered. Preparation before reading, slow section-by-section engagement, navigation strategy that starts with the core economic arguments, and active techniques that make it stick. This isn't just how to read a hard book. This is how you genuinely master one of the most important works of social science ever written. Think about what that means practically. 6 months from now, using this method, you'll understand why inflation happens, why government intervention creates the problems it claims to solve, why central planning is logically impossible, why free markets coordinate economic activity better than any alternative, not as slogans, as rigorous logical necessities you can explain and defend. When politicians promise solutions that sound compassionate but economically illiterate, you'll see through it immediately. When financial pundits blame greed for inflation, you'll know they're either ignorant or lying. When friends argue for more regulation, you'll be able to explain patiently, clearly, why that creates the interventionist spiral Mises warned about. That's not just knowledge. That's intellectual freedom. Freedom from propaganda, from manipulation, from economic infusion that keeps people dependent and afraid. And here's what's beautiful. Mises wrote this for you. He fled the Nazis with nothing, rebuilt his life in exile, and spent 9 years creating this monument because he believed ordinary people could and should understand economics. He respected you enough to demand rigorous thinking instead of feeding you simplified nonsense. The book sitting on your shelf, physical or digital, isn't mocking you. It's waiting for you to approach it the right way. So here's what you do this week. Not someday. This week. Day 1 to 2. Read Economic Calculation in the Socialist Commonwealth. It's free online at the Mises Institute website. 50 pages. 1 afternoon. This gives you the foundation that makes everything in Human Action make sense. Day 3 to 4. Watch or read introductory Austrian economics content. I recommend the Mises Institute's Introduction to Austrian Economics lecture series. Also free. Get the vocabulary. Learn the key players. Understand the methodological differences. Just a few hours total. Day 5. Read about Mises' life. Not a whole biography, just enough to understand what he lived through, what he was fighting against, why he wrote with such urgency. Wikipedia is fine for this. 30 minutes. Day 6. Set up your system. Buy a physical copy of Human Action. If you don't have one, get a notebook for your own word summaries and real-world application journal. Block out 3 weekly time slots of 90 minutes each for reading sessions. Put them on your calendar, like important meetings. Day 7, rest. Let the preparation settle. You're about to begin a 6-month intellectual journey that will transform how you understand economics, politics, and human cooperation. Then, starting week 2, open Human Action to Part 3, Economic Calculation. Not page 1. Part 3. Remember the navigation strategy. Read one section using the 5-step method. Slow, Active, taking notes in your own words. Stopping when confused. Reviewing before you close a book. 10 pages a first session is a victory. 15 pages is excellent. 20 pages means you're flying and should probably slow down to make sure you're really absorbing it. Here's what you're not doing: racing to finish, skimming to get the gist, reading passively hoping it'll stick, comparing your pace to others. You're building understanding brick by brick. That's the only thing that matters. There's a line from Mises that haunts me. He said, "The body of economic knowledge is an essential element in the structure of human civilization. It is a foundation upon which modern industrialism and all the moral, intellectual, technological, and therapeutical achievements of the last centuries have been built." Do you feel the weight of that? Economic knowledge isn't trivial. It's not just for specialists or academics. It's the foundation of civilization itself. When that knowledge is lost or corrupted, civilizations collapse. When it's preserved and applied, human flourishing explodes. That's what's in human action, not opinions, not partisan talking points. The logical structure that explains how human cooperation through markets creates prosperity and how intervention destroys it. 6 months from now, using this method, you'll possess that knowledge, not perfectly. Nobody masters Mises completely on first reading, but thoroughly enough to see reality clearly, to resist economic propaganda, to understand the forces shaping your life. You'll read the news differently, vote differently, think about your career, your savings, your family's future differently, because you'll understand how the economic world actually works, not how politicians pretend it works. That understanding is worth more than another degree, more than another certification, more than reading 50 shallow business books that tell you nothing true. This channel exists to help you discover the thinkers who actually explain reality: Mises, Hayek, Sowell, Chesterton, Scruton, the ones who saw clearly while everyone else was confused. Subscribe if you're ready to read seriously, think rigorously, and understand deeply. Next video, we're exploring Mises' most devastating argument against central planning and why it perfectly explains the economic chaos of 2024. See you there. And meanwhile, start reading. Page by page, brick by brick, you're building a cathedral of understanding. The cathedral is waiting.